Well, hello there, folks. Welcome to Pits To Podium and the Inside Line F1 podcast. And this weekend, we make history. For the first time ever, Formula One is going to try out sprint racing. But that's not the only thing to watch for at this weekend's British Grand Prix. Here's all that. Here is what you should look out for this weekend. Here we go. Firstly, the sprint qualifying, of course, as we mentioned at the start. But then, can Mercedes bring it home for Lewis? Next, we discuss more about the last time we may see a major fan favorite. What is that all about? Listen in to find out. We have the stats preview for Sundaram on the audio version of it, along with discussing a very interesting part in the midfield. And finally, answering all your questions about this race weekend. I'm pumped up. I'm so excited for this episode, as I'm sure you are as well, because this time it's just going to be such a unique race weekend. Let's not waste any more time right here. Let's dive right into it for this episode of the Inside Line F1 podcast and Pits to Podium. Well, hello there, folks. Welcome back in. And my name is Samuel Arora. You might know me from the driving force on Hotstar. Joining me, as always, the former marketing head of the Force India Formula One team, Kunal Shah, who now works as a motorsport consultant at the Veersport Network in Norway. Kunal, it's quite clear we're making history this time out. We are genuinely in unprecedented territory now.
Absolutely, Samuel. Thank you very much for that opening. And yes, we are making history. We are seeing Formula One make history. And for once, we are actually going to be part of that history because up until now, the 70 odd years that Formula One has been racing, we've always seen history happen before our time. And here this weekend, we're going to see history happen during our time. And the buzzword, there's just one buzzword this weekend, that's F1 sprint, or the sprint qualifying, as we've known for it. We've known about it since several months now. And I'm pretty pumped about it. And, guys, Somil has done a brilliant explanation of what the F1 sprint is, which we will play later on in this episode near about the 20th or 22nd minute mark. So look out for that, because there are so many questions around it. What is the format? How would you use tires? Who is going to be the pole sitter? How are points awarded? And Somil, I applaud that video of yours. I loved it because it goes addressing so many unheard questions. So, I still have questions in my head, which is like, okay, what is the tire situation going to be like? And so, guys, remember to check back, by the 20th or 22nd minute, Somil's exclusive segment on the F1 sprint.
That's on the audio version. For the video, click on the top right hand side. You'll get a link to that one where we answer all these questions. But Kunal, before we get to sprint racing, we have to discuss that point exclusively for a few minutes. But firstly, why Silverstone? What makes this circuit so special? And yeah, at this stage, everyone knows that Silverstone is a circuit you can always rely on for a very entertaining race. But still, there's this certain charm about Silverstone that can make it probably the best place to begin for sprint racing.
Yeah, it's a circuit, cloaked with history completely. Right? Like, this is the 72nd British Grand Prix, and for all the 72 odd years that Formula One has been around, there's always been a British Grand Prix, which makes it actually the only race to have always been on the calendar. And, iconic circuit in itself, Silverstone, also iconic corner, Mackett's and Beckett's and Cops, and it's just so amazing to, in fact, be there as well. And 100% sold out capacity, Somil. Yep. So it somewhat makes sense that despite all the money being involved, for hosting F1 Sprint, which Helmut Marko was kind enough to say that the organizers at Silverstone are paying more money to have the first ever F1 Sprint, it sort of also makes sense that Silverstone hosts the first ever F1 Sprint. And to me, the bigger challenge that F1 Sprint brings together, Somil, is the fact that teams will again be forced to rework their workflows. The simple thing being that suddenly free practice 1, which is probably the least followed practice sessions, becomes ever important, because you get all of that 1 hour to sort your car out, to get your setup right, to get all the settings you want. And you've got to do that, of course, in 60 minutes. But there are parc fermé conditions, which then mean that teams have to condense all their, all the mechanical work that they would do on their car within shorter hours. I was told that teams generally do it over 7 hours, and now they'll have to do it within 3.5 hours. So
Crazy.
that's one big challenge that teams are going to face. But we know Formula One teams, they would have practiced this over and over again, knowing that the F1 sprint is happening. So adds to uncertainty. And we know from before, we know from history, 72 years of that if there's one thing that team don't like, it's the whole uncertainty and the unpredictability around the F1 sprint.
So true, which brings us to ask another few questions about sprint qualifying, about this whole format, about how things are going to work out in this aspect. I'm a bit intrigued, Kunal. Probably this is the first time in all of 72 years, that is, I think now that Formula One has existed, that teams and drivers will now have a target only for 30 minutes. And it's not like a made-up scenario within a race where we have a red flag and there's only a 30-minute race to go. For the first time ever, there is a deliberate target of only 30 minutes to race for. And genuinely, the way things change in terms of strategy, in terms of tyre management, in terms of fuel, all of that is gone. And this means that, say, someone like Sergio Perez, who's never had a pole position in his 200 Grand Prix, could finally do it because he's been so good in terms of race pace that he's never really had a chance in qualifying. Maybe this could just suit him after all.
It could, lots of interesting surprises that could come our way. And you touched upon Checo Perez, and I remember reading one of the comments on our social media handle. Could we see the same podium in F1 sprint followed by the same podium at the Grand Prix? Which by itself is one of those things that sort of puts us off. But again, all scenarios open. And you also mentioned strategy, Samuel, and the way the F1 sprint has sort of fit into the weekend opens up a lot of strategy for the entire weekend altogether, because in qualifying, all teams will use the softs for the race. There is an open choice of tire, especially the starting tire, which could also open up several, strategic possibilities. And to add to this, the Silverstone, race itself is very heavy on tire degradation. So, I'm excited to see how F1 sprint fits into all of this. And, one thing I really loved is what Ross Brawn said, that they will be using the F1 sprint judiciously in the future. So guys, don't worry. Qualifying will still be the key thing to follow on Saturday for most of the races. But for this weekend, just sit back and see what F1 sprint can deliver for all of us.
And if there's any positive to take back from this, at least we're seeing Formula One try things. How often do we end up sitting on our beds or on our couch saying that we want to do something? These Formula One have taken the initiative. It may not be something we may like or not like, whatever. You've only got to see to watch it. And there are so many drivers may not take the risks. They may just end up putting the focus back on Friday qualifying. Whatever. Watch it. Enjoy it for what it is. Take a look at what happens, and we shall see all that takes place on Saturday. But questions. What is it that's excited you the most about it, honestly, all the way through?
So before we even know what the F1 sprint is going to be, so the 30 minutes could well be the most boring 30 minutes. It could just be a long stint on some tire, right? But the one thing that excites me the most, Sawmill, is the kind of pressure it puts on the teams to get things right and get things right on time. Because, like I said before, the Parc Fermé conditions that come into application after free practice on Friday, if you do not get your setup right for qualifying, and you of course then need to also use the FP1 session to get the setup right for even higher fuel loads, the race trims that they run these cars in. So if you don't get it right, you actually start the weekend on the back foot all the way from qualifying itself. And given the limited free track time, you actually may not get as much time to make a comeback in terms of setup changes, in terms of getting the sweet spot, as we've heard the drivers say. Because for once, we actually have more business sessions on a Grand Prix weekend than practice sessions. The practice sessions are just 1 hour each on Friday and Saturday, but there's actually more time that the drivers being on track in their cars will actually help their cause in the World Championship. So that's the one thing I'm really, really looking forward to, and how teams are going to adapt. And, talking of adaptations, They would have changed even small things like when they run the simulator sessions,
True.
because you given the park firmware conditions, they would have had to change when the simulator drivers would be running all their data models before they actually make those changes in the real life on track as well. So it's really made the teams sit back and rework their entire weekend workflow, and they're doing it for the first time. So let's just see who gets it right and who doesn't.
Exactly. All the way through, it's going to be new, if anything. And what I really like the most is that there might be discrepancies. Now, some teams might just treat it as one long stint on one particular tire. But imagine the sort of, I mean, of course, teams don't race for media image, right? Whatever it may be. But imagine the sort of headlines you can generate if you go for a really good result in sprint qualifying. Maybe just trying to chase that extra point. Maybe it could be, say, someone like a Yuki Tsunoda coming in through in the midfield, and he's not scored many points. Maybe he could have a very, very frantic drive, maybe get that final point, and who knows which way things could go in that aspect. How entertaining could that be to see all the others just trying to conserve while Yuki Tsunoda goes for it all the way through? Stuff like that can make you really excited. But final question before we move off to discuss other things, Kunal, is points. Now, there was a discussion in the Formula One paddock that maybe there are a bit too much of points awarded in the sprint race. 3 points, of course, for the winner, 2 for the driver who finishes second, and 1 for the driver who finishes third. What's your take on that? Is it too much? Is it too less? Would you have liked to see drivers in the midfield rewarded for that as well, perhaps?
It's a test again. So at the moment, I just think that, okay, let's just see how this goes. Of course, it does seem like, there's more points in the offing for the likes of Max and Lewis, and then whoever else takes third place. And third place has been one of the most contested places on the podium itself, right? So I think they will experiment further with points, and whether it'll be top 6 or top 5 or something to that effect. But what I like also is they're trying to bring back a lot of historic relevance and historic associations we've had with the world of motorsport. So there isn't a podium ceremony, which is fine, but there's going to be a victory lap, as we know. There may not be champagne, but there's a wreath that will be given out to the top 3 drivers after the race. So lots of things that they are sort of trying to put in place. And, Saumil, you mentioned that teams could treat this as a long stint on a particular set of tires because, pit stops are not mandatory, right? But I'll also turn that one to add further to your point, which is to say that what is the one thing that excites us most about a Grand Prix that happens? It is the race start and the opening few laps, right? Now imagine this weekend, thanks to the F1 sprint, we're going to see that twice. So at least the race start and the opening few laps is when the entertainment value is doubled for all of us in Formula One.
I mean, it brings up that sort of discussion like we have in cricket, right? What do you like the most about a 50-over match? The first 10 overs and the last 10 overs? Well, we'll just squash it into a 20-over match. And then somebody watched a 20-over match and said, well, it's a bit too long. How about T10? Then someday it'll be T5, T4, T1, whatever. That's something for later on. But you get the idea. Shorter could be the way ahead. Maybe F1 is just trying to gauge what this feels like. But if there's one thing I have to say, don't judge it too harshly in the first showing. Maybe it can be too good. Maybe it can be too bad. Wait and watch. One race is a bit too less. That's why F1 has had 3 trials this year. So take your time, ease off with it. But now, we have to ease into other fun topics. Namely, well, it's been a bit of a trend now. Can Mercedes bring it home for Lewis? And that actually goes in hand with a few of the Instagram questions that we've got here today. Let's show them on screen right now. And this is firstly one by Shilp, who's asked, will Mercedes bounce back with new upgrades? And secondly, one by Manav, who's come up and asked, can Mercedes bounce back at their home turf with new upgrades after Red Bull's dominance at their home turf? More or less the same question, Kunal, just paraphrasing each of them. But the idea here is the same. Can Mercedes bring it home for Lewis in this case? Because finally they've got those upgrades that Lewis has been rambling about. But question is it enough?
Well, it's definitely the most exciting thing for the weekend. Mercedes's upgrades, given the whole, the whole chatter that we've seen around it ever since the first race in Austria and the whole confusion around it as well. And the truth being, Saumil, if Lewis wants to launch an attack on the 32-point lead that Max Verstappen has built for himself in the Drivers' Championship, there's no better place to start than at home itself. And that's what Mercedes's upgrades would be measured against. Can it help Lewis take the fight to Max Verstappen, right? And let's remember, guys, the margin, as we've called it, we've said fine margins literally in every single episode we've had this season. And given those fine margins, those relatively small gains that Mercedes could find, it would give us the whole Verstappen versus Hamilton battle back in our lives, because in the last few races, Verstappen has sort of crawled ahead by a few tenths, as we already know. And Samuel, it could be various factors that bring us that battle. Of course, apart from just the Mercedes' upgrades, could it be the weather? Could it be the circuit characteristics? Could it just be the temperatures? Could it be so many small things that make that bit of a difference? But yes, all hopes this weekend on what Mercedes is going to bring for Lewis Hamilton. And the chatter that I spoke about from what started in Austria first started from Toto Wolff saying, hey, we've stopped developing this car, and then James Allison turning around and saying, but we've got upgrades coming in the next race in Austria, right? And I think F1 and Mercedes have done a good job of explaining what the difference between developing and upgrading a car is. So you can read this on the official F1 website. It's explained pretty well. But yes, all eyes on what Mercedes can give Lewis Hamilton to take the fight to Max Verstappen, because that's the one thing that Lewis has been saying. Guys, give me a car that I can take to the battle with Max.
And the best part is, honestly, that there have been questions. Honda apparently coming up with an upgrade in the middle of the season, and that one is apparently giving them performance upgrades, and Mercedes are saying, well, this is not allowed, that's illegal. And Honda have come up to say that, well, it's not a direct update, it's a reliability side gain, but they have learned how to make that engine better. That's one thing that maybe could have made the difference. And we saw that because Mercedes, well, their rear end apparently was not just sticking about, apparently. I'm not an expert at these things, but so they had to put a bigger rear wing in so that those sort of issues could be sorted out. But that gave them more drag and so less top speed. And that's why Mercedes were bottom at the speed traps in Austria. Never happens, that one, but it did. So that is going to be an intriguing factor to watch out for. And just what is it that Mercedes have in store? Is it something on the front wing? What is it all about? All that sort of stuff just brings in so much. But Kunal, a big question to ask this week, and more on the lighter side of things. Can we see another Manscaped lawnmower moment of the weekend? Because the last time we were out here, Max Verstappen ended up doing that. Not last time, wait, that was 2 years ago. Goodness, I forgot 2020 for a second. but there can be a few at Silverstone. There's lots of grass to cut out. And the best part is that this circuit track limits are clean, clear, crisp. I just love it.
Absolutely. It's a perfect circuit to host the Manscaped lawnmower moment, Somil. And again, just like we said about the F1 sprint, it gives us 2 starts and 2 opening lap opportunities.
True.
It gives us 2 opportunities to pick the best of the best Manscaped lawnmower moment of the race. And I'm pretty excited to see that, and again, that's on the lighter side of things. And another thing to, sort of add to the lighter side of things, since we were speaking about Mercedes, Lewis Hamilton will actually be driving down the Hamilton Straight for the first time ever at the Silverstone circuit. And I think it's probably the first time in the history of the sport that an active driver has been honored in such a manner. So that'll be exciting as well. And of course, there's a tweet that's been doing the rounds ever since the last couple of races that imagine Max Verstappen using the Honda power to overtake Lewis Hamilton down the Hamilton Straight.
Very nice. Is it the Hamilton Straight or the Sir Lewis Hamilton Straight? I don't think people call him that anymore for some reason, but that's his official title now. So, I mean, it's just baffling to see how great the man has been. But finally, maybe it could be Lewis who brings back something home for England now that they've not done anything in terms of tennis, in terms of football. What else? Cricket? Cricket's been all right. I don't think it's the biggest thing in the world right now, but still, we can focus on that later. Now, on the audio side of things, this is where we introduce you to Sundaram's stats preview. You know who he's all about, you know what his work is all about, and that will come in right now. But on the video side, don't worry guys, we'll post it as a standalone in a couple of days' time. But we've got to move on. We've got to add another couple of questions into the mix right now. What we have to speak about right now, Kunal, is just something very sad because this could be the last time we see a major fan favorite into action. Uh, not now. Many people might not expect what we're talking about here, but pit stops. This could be the last time ever, in many years at least, that we get to see a sub 2 second pit stop. The new rules are coming in from Hungary. This is the last race before it. Honestly, it just feels slightly bad. I mean, I know we're just acting like geeks right now to say that, oh, 2 second pit stops are gone, this is a big thing. On the broader sense, it doesn't, but it's just such a charming element, right? Of Formula One, and to see it go away, even to 2.2 seconds now, this doesn't quite feel the same in a way.
It doesn't, and you're right. It is definitely the last weekend when the new regulations for pit stops, which, as the FIA wording didn't say it, but the media said it, to slow down pit stops came into place, right? And imagine, this is the weekend when Red Bull, just to showcase how strong they are, go and put in all their pit stops, all the relevant pit stops that they need to make, sub 2 seconds. Maybe go and make a new world record just to prove a point, saying, yes, you guys are slowing us down. But that's very well thought through, Samuel, because pit stops are a key element of the entertainment and the spectacle of Formula One. Of course, a key element about the race strategy as well. We've seen races won and lost, positions swapped because of pit stops being slow enough, right? And sit back and enjoy the pit stops as we see them this weekend. And who knows, if the F1 sprint becomes a bonker of a race, then we might see a few teams and drivers make a pit stop during the F1 sprint as well.
Well, that could be more by necessity considering what could happen on the opening lap of the sprint race. But let's hope not. Let's hope that things are clean in the sprint race and we just get to see something like a new world record. It'll be the last time. It's a bit of a sad thing, I know. We are acting like geeks, yes, whatever. But just the sight of those pit stops is quite something. But we can't dwell on that for too long because there are other fun things to discuss as well. Well, we've got to talk about an interesting thing happening in the midfield. When do we not have an interesting thing happening in the midfield? It seems like now. But this genuinely, Kunal, could be the first time ever that we have a British GP where more fans are coming in to cheer a driver except of Lewis Hamilton, and that could be Lando Norris, because right now he just seems to be the darling of everyone around the world, especially the British fans. And when you also consider all the sad things that have happened with him after the Year 2020 final at Wembley Stadium, I think the support is just completely on his side this time out. Do you think we genuinely will have more orange t-shirt wearing fans than white ones for Lewis?
Or maybe black ones for Lewis, no reference to Lewis, but with the whole black livery that Mercedes, adopted. But you're right, Samuel. Lando Norris is definitely the darling of the Formula One world, apart from a couple of people who, unfortunately mugged him a few days ago. And I'm pretty sure he's going to use this weekend to bounce back psychologically because, he must have been shaken, or he said he was shaken after the whole incident, the unfortunate incident. And that said, it is something that, British fans will be there cheering Lando Norris as the underdog, than Lewis Hamilton as the challenger in the title. And that's fantastic because also one more thing that, came out as a stat, every single British Grand Prix has seen at least one British driver race in it. And this year, of course, we've got 3 British drivers. And, it's lovely how George Russell and Lando Norris are being nurtured into, mini heroes, becoming major heroes by the fans, by the media itself. And this being a home race for them, it's only going to be exceptional given the whole crowd support they have.
Can't wait. Can't wait to see what happens in the midfield now that we may have an outstanding performance by somebody who wants to rush through in sprint qualifying. It could change the grid order a little bit. As I mentioned earlier on, maybe you could see someone like a Yuki Tsunoda or Sebastian Vettel for that matter go extremely quick in sprint qualifying in a bid to get something and eventually might play the alternate strategy. We've only got to wait and watch with all that stuff. But now, before we head on to our very fun questions from all our viewers on social media, I've got to share one thing with you. As you can see on the screen right now, these are some of the articles that we've got on the Pits To Podium website. Some features, one about what if Drive to Survive stops on this very day, and what about Renault's, or Alpine's rather, Driver Academy. More on that by clicking on the link in the description Check that out when you've got the time to. But now it's time for this fun part. Now we get to speak about all the questions from social media, and there are quite a few of them. So let's bring them all in. Of course, we've answered Shilp and Manav's question about Mercedes bouncing back. There's also one fun point from Shilp right now. Now everyone has to tune in for all 3 days. Excited. How excited are you to see Formula One have more context-based race sessions, Kunal? Because finally, you can't slouch anytime now.
Like I said, we actually have more meaningful sessions for the first time ever than before. There's more sessions where you genuinely get rewarded for great performance than just drive around in circles because you're trying to test different things in practice. So that definitely is one big draw for me and for all of us, this weekend.
Absolutely. And, well, there's some fun stuff in the midfield as well. But the most interesting part in the midfield that we have to watch on Saturday. I love this question. I was just overjoyed on seeing it. One by Akshay Prabhu. And Akshay, thank you so much for sending that in. And also for everyone for sending in their questions. Really, we love to see all of them. Just warms my heart. This one, though. Will George retain the Mr. Saturday crown? This is a spicy one, Kunal, because now, well, it's a bit of a format change, and as we all know, Williams, over the course of more than one lap, doesn't quite seem to be the best combo anymore.
It doesn't. And, in one way, we can turn around and say that, hey, maybe having a sprint qualifying decide the grid for the race it works against the likes of a George Russell, who's a qualifying master, right? But that said, in the last 3 races, he's finished 11th and 12th, right? Apart from one no score in the Styrian Grand Prix, right? Yeah. So, it's gonna be a catch-22. Maybe he just pulls out another brilliant performance in the race. Maybe it's just the Saturdays that work for him. Doesn't matter what session it is. We could probably have the Grand Prix on a Saturday, and George Russell could do well as well. So I think he's going to be Mr. Saturday for us, irrespective.
It should be so much fun. But that's it from us, almost, folks. Of course, on the podcast now, this is where you listen to that, of course, to the preview of the sprint race, and you can check the link on the top right corner for more on that. But final thoughts, Kunal, before we go in, what do you reckon will happen this weekend on a broader perspective?
It's going to be a fun weekend, home Grand Prix for a lot of teams, right? Lots of drivers as well, like we spoke about. Aston Martin, the first home race for them as Aston Martin.
Yeah.
Esteban Ocon, he's got a new chassis this weekend because he's been pretty convinced that there's something wrong with his car. So good to see how he bounces back, because after announcing his 3-year renewal with Alpine, he's suddenly been out of place. Also, formats like sprint qualifying or F1 sprint just work so much in favor of drivers like, Fernando Alonso. Yeah. Very cheeky when it comes to race starts and so on. So he'll be definitely the one to look out for. And somehow there's also this feeling of, when will Daniel Ricciardo end up being the Daniel Ricciardo we know? So while we are cheering Lando Norris's heroics, it's also one eye on Ricciardo's recovery as he, sort of tries to find himself back in form. Because, he made a statement which is like, hey, I'm going to start using a home simulator because drivers like Norris and Leclerc and Max are using it, and maybe it's helping them. So you can just see how much it's, impacting him subconsciously as well, that he's saying, I'm going to do what it takes to go and match these young drivers who are literally just driving all the time, whether in the factory simulator, in the home simulator, or actually in the car itself, Somal.
I've commentated on Lando Norris and Max Verstappen on iRacing races. If Daniel is also added to that list, I will be overjoyed. Come on iRacing, please, Daniel. Come on all the fun events. It'll be awesome. But that's it from this part of the review. If you're listening to the audio version, now begins the part where we discuss the sprint qualifying. But that's it from us on the video side, folks. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And you know the deal. Subscribe to Pits To Podium and the Inside Line F1 podcast. And as I mentioned, check out the links in our description below for the articles, for our Grand Prix preview, for the prediction competition as well, for the data analysis, all that stuff down below. So until then, folks, see you next time.
Bye-bye.